Hey guys, how's it going? I'm so glad that you joined us today for Coffee and Questions. I hope you grabbed a cup of your favorite coffee and that you can just sit down and listen to this, or maybe not. You're grabbing it on the go. You're listening as you're moving around, and that's fine too. I'm enjoying a cup of apple crisp coffee. I never knew this existed before today, and it's not too bad. I was thinking how we could tell the difference between a rabbit and a hare. And I was thinking about that, and I realized that the way we can tell the difference between a rabbit and a hare is that a hare is wearing a wig. Get it? All right, I know that's a bad joke. I know, it's terrible. Speaking of bad and terrible, remember last week we were talking about, we kind of kicked off this question of why is there, why can we believe in God? How can we believe in God if there's pain and suffering and evil in this world? We kind of kicked off with this premise that was presented a long time ago that if God is all good and God is all powerful, yet evil and pain and suffering exist, then how can we know that God is real? Because if he's all good, he'd want to get rid of evil. He'd want it gone, and if he was all powerful, then he'd be able to. So either God is not actually all powerful, he's not capable of removing it, since we know evil exists, or God is not all good, he doesn't actually want to remove it all, or God does not exist. And of course that seems really strong, and last week I argued that there are some assumptions built into this premise that when you begin to look at them begins to cause this whole thing to break down. Now, as I've been thinking about this, there are basically three aspects of this question that I want to pull out and answer off the top of my head. And then if you've got more questions about it, I'd love to talk about this. Remember, Coffee and Questions work because you guys share your questions with me, and I do my best to try to answer those questions as I get them. All right, so there are three aspects I want to cover, so we'll make a video for each one of them. And first off is that question, some people call it moral evil, or why do people choose to do bad things? So a lot of the evil and the pain and the suffering in this world is caused by people's choices to do what is wrong. And so we have to answer that question. The secondly is what some people call natural evils. Hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, sickness, disease, plague, all these sort of things that happen, right? And people go, well, if God was good and powerful, why does he allow those things to happen? So we're going to talk about that one next week. All right, and deal with that one next week. And then the third thing that I want to talk about is how evil and pain and suffering actually points to the reality of God's existence. They actually help prove that there is a God. And so we'll talk about that next week. All right, and so one of the first assumptions in this premise that we need to cover is this very idea that evil or pain and good cannot coexist. People think if God is all good, then and pain and evil exist, then those things can't exist in the same circumstances. And yet we know that that's false. I mean, any parent understands this, right? Let's think about this. A classic example is how a child learns what hot is. You think about it. How does this happen for toddlers? Now, some of them just listen to mommy and daddy, and mommy and daddy say, oh, this is hot, don't touch it, and they just listen. But for a vast majority of toddlers, what they do is mom and dad say, this is hot, no touching, do not touch this, being the good, loving parents that they are. But the child, the instant that the parent's back is turned to them, they reach out and they touch this hot item and they get burnt. All right, and they get hurt and they're in pain. Now, are we going to argue that the parent is evil or even not good because the child reached out and touched something that they shouldn't? No, that doesn't work. Instead, we have something else at work here. What's at work? It's the free will of the child. The parent said, no, this is not healthy for you to touch. This is not good for you. This is painful. This is bad. This is evil. But the free will of the child says, I want to play with that no matter what. Now, we know that God created humanity with free will. We have the ability to choose to follow after God or choose not to follow after him. He made us with this free will. All right? And this is important that God would do that. Because why? Because we can't actually honestly love God unless we have the opportunity to choose not to love God. If God did not give us the opportunity to not love him, then what would happen? Well, then we would be forced into loving him. And is that a true love? We must be able to have the choice to choose not to follow him for our following him to have any real meaning. That, of course, is how evil came into this world. We as Christians do not believe that God created evil. We believe that he created good, but that evil is a corruption of the good things that he did create, a corruption caused by humans that ultimately influence their free will or use their free will to not follow God. Now, some might argue, well, can't God create a world with free will where there is no evil? Can't there be free will and not evil in the same circumstances? And that's a good question, but the honest answer is he can't. Now let's get something straight. All right, God is all powerful, but that doesn't mean that he can do anything, right? The Bible tells us very clearly that God cannot lie. All right, so we know that God cannot violate his own character, his own essence, and he can't obviously do what's logically impossible. Logically impossible things like, make a square circle. And another logically impossible thing is to force us to freely make only good choices. To be free will, then it has to be something that we choose to do, even if God doesn't want us to do it. A good example, all right, a good challenge. One of my professors asked this. He said, let's say a man wanted to kill someone else in the room, and so he draws out his gun and he points it at this other guy, and he pulls the trigger. And why doesn't God just turn that bullet into jello before it hits the man? Well, why not? Think about it for a second. You see, if God did that, he would be taking away the man's free will, the one who pulled the trigger, taking away that man's free will, and take away his ability to actually make a choice. You can make a choice as long as it's not the choice that I don't want you to make. Actually, the greater evil would be having a God who never gives us the choice to choose to do anything. A God who forces us every moment of every day to love him and do as we have been told. So the reality is that God can only remove moral evil in this world in two ways. Number one, he can remove every person from the face of the planet. I don't think he's going to do that. Or two, he can change people so they will want to choose to do what is right. Well, guess what? That is what Jesus was all about. He was about giving us the choice to choose to do the right decisions. It doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, because we all make terrible mistakes at that. So, though sometimes we revert to our old ways. All right, well, thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed your coffee and your quick little rest. Remember that you are loved. By the way, if you're ever interested in resources, I'll put them in the description down below. One resource I used today was a book by Natasha, Crain. It has a pretentious title, Keeping Your Kids on God's Side. Obviously titled to sell to paranoid parents who don't understand that kids have free will also, but she has some good premises and answers many difficult questions as well. Secondly, a little older but always good, Philip Yancey's Where is God When It Hurts? Thanks, guys. See you next week.